a shot across our bow in 1976. And I'm sure you fellas recall that. And we did very little about it. What we did was incrementally moved the object, is what we did. We said, okay, our average automobiles, our personal automobiles, get 15 miles to the gallon. So in 2 years from now, we're going to up that, and we're going to mandate that it be moved from 15 miles a gallon to 18 miles a gallon within 36 months or something along those lines. That, gentlemen, was the wrong thing to do. What we needed to do was, at that time, set a national agenda, just like we did in 1961 with President Kennedy, whenever he said, by the end of this decade, we're going to put a man on the moon. What we should have done in 1976 was said, by the end of this forthcoming decade, we're going to eliminate, or we're going to untether ourselves from oil. That doesn't mean totally eliminate our use of oil. But we could do that. And we have a very good reason for doing it today. And saying today, if President Obama would come out and say, by the end of this decade, we need to rid ourselves of the internal combustion engines in our personal automobiles. Think of that statement being a huge forest fire. A huge forest fire that completely devastates our use of oil and creates innovation. What happens after a lightning strikes hits a forest and it burns the forest up? And what happens right after that? There's a nice rain that comes through, and it puts out the fire completely. And what happens just days and weeks after that? New growth starts to emerge. That's exactly what would happen. I propose that's what would happen if President Obama would say, by the end of this decade, we're going to get rid of that internal combustion engine in our personal automobiles. That's what would happen. It would be complete innovation. And think of the jobs that would be created. And we have the ability to be able to do that. Right down in Huntsville, Alabama. In the northern part of Alabama. That is the Silicon Valley of the South, believe it or not. Because we have Marshall Space Flight Center there. We have Redstone Arsenal. We have the missile and munitions. We have engineers galore. And not far from that, in a 2-hour drive, we have the University of Alabama with its engineering program. And when I lived in Yorktown, Virginia, my next door neighbor was from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And he was an engineer with NASA. He had gone through engineering school at Alabama. And he was the guy, whenever the deflective shields, the ceiling tiles were falling off the show, that was what he was working on. At the wind tunnels and so forth, he was investigating. He and I talked a great deal. He was with NASA and I was with the Army. And but there's where our innovation lies. We're able to do that. But will we do it? No. Why not? Because no one is pushing it. No one is saying, okay, we're going to take this $1 billion over here and we're going to invest that in that particular project. No one is stepping forward and say, by the end of this decade, we need to get rid of that internal combustion engine. Why? Because it would have such an impact on businesses and big oil. And this is part of my thinking. If the deep horizon, deep well would have happened on the North Shore under the Arctic Circle, how would we have kept it from polluting us out of existence, possible existence? How would we have prevented that under the ice? How would we have combated it under the ice? Basically, in the Gulf, it was somewhat simple. It would have been more complex, however, had a major hurricane come in to the Gulf during that time that they were still combating it. But how? This is a question that I raised. How would we have combated that problem a mile beneath the ice in the Arctic Circle? And would that have possibly, what effect would that have had on our ecology? Not only just on the North Shore, but in the Arctic Circle, and the impact the ripple effect that would have had throughout Canada and into the United States. It could have been simply disastrous. My question is, should we be drilling offshore? Is it a good decision? The folks in Florida have said, no, we're not going to have any of that offshore drilling off the coast of Florida. But, yes, sir.
Well, a question. Just a week ago, in this press building, actually 2 weeks ago, the Peak Oil Group had its press conference in which they described their concerns over bringing the story to Washington decision makers, much like you're describing. The concept of peak oil, of course, is that at some point, either now or within a year or two, or a couple of years, we've reached the halfway point of usable oil. And I'll frame a question in a second here, but part of what their conference was about was they have a lot of military and other experts who accept this notion. And in fact, former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Dr. James Schlesinger was one of their keynote speakers. And I'll say that I wrote a number of articles about this and noted that the military that runs on liquid fuel seems to pay a lot more attention to this than elected political figures who may not want to convey bad news to the voting public. So their speaker program had only one federally elected speaker, Dr. Roscoe Bartlett, a Maryland congressman and former professor. If you were elected, would you pull in your horns on this type of talk, because it does make the public nervous, or would you keep saying what you're saying?
I'd keep saying what I'm saying. What you see is what you get. Unlike my opponent today nor tomorrow, am I going to be looking at 6 years down the road, re-election. Gentlemen, I'm already retired. I do not see myself as a career politician. I don't want to be a career politician. What I want to do is I want to continue as best I possibly can in the time that I have left to serving my state, Alabama, and the people of this nation. I'm not concerned about the next election. If the people put me in office for 6 years, if they put me in office for 6 years, they will have the opportunity to judge me at the end of that 6-year period and tell me whether they want me back or they don't want me back. Or someone else can step forward and challenge the position and move me out and move me into retirement for good. But I am not, I will tell it as best as I possibly can. Yes, sir.
Well, one more. You've got a big smile. You're clearly a happy warrior, but nobody answered your questions or had a meeting here. Are you upset? I mean, you had a press conference here that you're able to articulate your message, but are you angry on behalf of the people of Alabama at the lack of interest from the appointed officials who are supposed to be serving the public and responding to the public?
Let me answer that with just one word: disappointed. Not angry. Somewhat a little sad, but I am primarily I'm disappointed. And the reason it goes to disappointment is because I have got to go back to Alabama now in the next week, get back on the campaign trail, and I've got to face those people in Alabama who are going to be asking me questions. And one of the questions that I'm sure that they're going to be asking me is, why not? Why were you not able to meet? Do they not see us in Washington as being concerned citizens? Or are they looking at us as being second-class citizens? And I don't have an answer for that. So yes, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed because I don't have an answer to take back to the people of Alabama. And that's one of the things that strongly brought me here to start with, seeking answers. And I don't have any answers, any distinct answers.